Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and this is the Improve Your Chess video series. We try to make you a better chess player every time we do a video in our series. Hopefully you've been enjoying the series. Okay, we're going to talk today a little bit more about, well, I don't even want to tell you what we're going to talk about till after we do a little exercise. I'm going to show you a fragment from one of my students' games recently. I'm going to show you a series of a few moves, and I want you to stop and think about every move in the series and think, what would I have done? What should I do? Was that move that they played a good move? And then we'll go back and we'll talk about it, and then we'll talk about, why that's the main sequence for what we want to talk about today. So let's do that. So Black has just played rook to d2, and it's White's move, and White has to worry about the double attack on e2 and b2. Now, of course, Black's threatening to win a whole piece on e2 and only win a pawn on b2. So White saves the knight by counterattacking the bishop on b5. Black has a bishop pair here. So after knight c3, Black plays queen b6, counterattacking against f2. White saves f2 by playing queen f3. Black says, I'm not going to let you win the bishop pair. He plays bishop c6, hitting the queen, which is also guarding that pawn. And White plays queen to g3 to save the queen. So again, I want you to think about each of these moves. Think about how good they are, whether you would have played them. Let's go back and look at that sequence again. The sequence here is it's White's move. White plays knight to c3. Again, we're asking you what you think about each move. You can pause the video after each move and decide. Knight c3, queen b6, queen f3, bishop c6, queen g3. Okay, so let's talk about this. The subject I want to talk about today is quiescence errors. So what we're seeing in the sequence of moves is a little bit of, I won't call it superficial thinking. It's really not kind of paying attention to what all the possibilities are and which ones are the most important. So here, obviously, Black is threatening the knight. Obviously, White has to do something about it. Trying to guard the knight with moves like bishop d1 or king f1 is kind of crazy. So yes, you're going to lose that pawn on b2. So playing knight c6 is a good move. Okay, so now Black has a choice. He played queen to b6. What are his other candidate moves? Well, he could have saved the bishop pair by playing bishop c6, or he could have simply taken the pawn with rook takes b2. Let's ask the computer what it would do on rook takes b2. Rook takes b2. I have Stockfish 12, which is a nice improvement on Stockfish 11. And Stockfish 12 says, yeah, rook takes b2 is a good move. After knight takes b5, queen takes b5. White doesn't have anything better than maybe just hitting the rook with queen d4, and then Black can save the rook with a move like bishop a3, and it says Black's pretty much winning here. Okay, what else could Black have done? Well, instead of playing rook takes b2 or queen b6 like he did in the game, he could have played bishop c6. Now, I think this game was played on Lead Chess, and Lead Chess was using Stockfish 11 instead of Stockfish 12. And Leadfish is like chess.com. It has an analyzer. And it says that bishop c6 was probably the best move. And Stockfish 12 thinks that it's very close between bishop c6, and it says if White plays queen f4 to save the queen, Black should simply control the open file with rook cd8, and his rook on the 7th rank and the bishop pair give him a monster advantage. Stockfish 12 has it about 5 pawn advantage here. If instead he plays bishop to c5, counterattacking the f2 pawn, white can still win the bishop pair, but black gets this visions of bishop takes check, king h1, and now it's best to just take off the knight. And black's again completely winning. He could play something like rook f1, and black has a rook on the 7th rank. It's bishop opposite colors, but it's in the middle game, and black is up a pawn with a monster advantage. Okay, so if you thought that queen to b6 counterattacking f2 was a really good move, we've already seen that black has a lot better moves than that. So black plays queen to b6 to hit the pawn, and white played queen to f3. Well, it's true, queen takes f2 check is a threat, but if you look at the position closely and you try to figure out, what white can play here. Now, white's in trouble no matter what he does. Let's say that for sure. White can play knight takes b5. And you might say, but that doesn't stop the threat. The problem is, if black carries out the threat with queen takes f2 check, then after king h1, the queen that was going to recapture on b5 has instead gone to f2 and only taken a pawn, and he got a check for it, but now with his tempo, black has nothing great. The queen on e4 is guarding the mate on g2, and there's no way to recapture, so black has just lost the game. He's gone from a winning position to a losing one. So what that means is that white really didn't need to guard this pawn. All he needed to do was force black to do something, and what he could have done was gotten rid of the strong bishop pair by playing knight takes b5. Again, black has a bad game if white has a bad game if black just recaptures queen takes b5. But this would be by far the best way to try to defend the position. All right, so instead of knight takes b5, white went queen f3, and now we saw black says, okay, I'm not going to give you the bishop pair, I'm going to get a tempo on the queen, and black plays bishop to c6. Well, when I was going over the game with my student, I got to this position, and I said, wait a second, can't black just play like rook takes f2? It took me a few seconds to figure out whether he could do that or not, but it was the first move that I looked at, and I said, all right, well, rook takes f2, that seems to work in all lines. For instance, you play rook takes f2. The most obvious move for white is to play queen takes f2, but that's the whole point. If you haven't seen my video on seeds of tactical destruction, this is a seed now. He's got the queen and the king on the same line. I can put a bishop on that line, and the only white piece that can get in the way is the rook, but that doesn't help because the rook's not guarded enough on bishop takes e3. If white plays knight e4, that doesn't help. It hits the bishop and guards the queen, but after bishop takes, knight takes, black's winning a queen and a pawn for a rook and a bishop, plus white's position is kind of falling apart. So this is completely working. What else could, after rook takes f2, what else could white do? Well, black's threatening to play rook takes queen, discovered check, but he's threatening discovered checks no matter where the queen goes. For instance, suppose the queen goes to h3. I could try to win the queen with rook f3 check. Stockfish says I'm up 13 pawns. But even better is I have discovered double check mate in one with rook f1 checkmate. So basically, white has no choice. If white plays knight takes b5 to stop rook f1 from being mate, all right, rook takes f3 is check. And I'm winning the queen with check, and white's not getting anything. So basically, after rook takes f2, white can't move the queen, he can't move the king, he has to take the rook and allow me to pin it to the king. So as I said, I asked my student after I said that, I said, how long did it take me to see that rook takes f2 works? And he said, well, it was basically almost instantly. I said, yeah, it took a couple seconds because I had to look at rook e3. But the first move I looked at in this position after queen f3 was rook takes f2. I'm always looking for my checks, captures, and threats. Well, clearly my check, queen takes f2, is silly. When he takes my queen, I don't have any big pin anymore. Well, I do, but I'm giving up a whole queen just to win a queen for a bishop. That doesn't make any sense. So queen takes f2 doesn't make a lot of sense, but rook takes f2 is a candidate move. Now, a lot of my students, including my students in this game, they miss this kind of stuff. They see it in a puzzle. This is one of the big differences between playing a game and doing a puzzle. When you're in a game, nobody's telling you that black has a combination here. When I showed you these several moves a few minutes ago and asked you to look at them, I didn't tell you that there was a tactic in there. I just asked you to look at how good the moves were. But when I'm looking at this game, I didn't know that rook takes f2 worked. Now, when I looked over at the Lee chess printout from Stockfish 11, of course Stockfish 11 saw this and mentioned it, but when I was looking at the game, I didn't see the printout. So I didn't know about rook takes f2, but it was the first move that I looked at. I wanted to see if it would work. If you look at rook takes f2, queen takes f2, and you say, well, that doesn't work because the counting issue on f2 is white's guarding it twice and black's guarding it twice, so after rook takes f2, if we just trade off completely on f2, black is getting a pawn and a queen, and white's getting a queen and a rook, so white's winning a rook for a pawn. If that's the counting issue and that's all you do, then that's a quiescence error, because after rook takes f2, queen takes f2, first of all, queen takes f2 check is not forced. It's certainly a candidate move. But also, if you stop and just say that black's losing a rook for a pawn there, that's a quiescence error because you're not considering bishop c5 as the intermediate move after rook takes f2. And understanding what it takes to not stop and to look and see, do these things work, is really important. And a lot of my students say, well, I don't want to do that because I'm afraid I'll lose a rook for a pawn. And I tell them, you're not losing a rook for a pawn because you're not going to do it if it doesn't work. When you look at rook takes f2, queen takes f2, you're not losing a rook for a pawn. You're only looking at it. I make an analogy with looking at a bank. Suppose you're walking down the street and there's a bank over to the side, and you look at it and say, wow, there's probably millions of dollars in that bank. Think of what I could do with millions of dollars. Well, if the police come up and arrest you and say, we're arresting you for stealing millions of dollars, they can't do that. You didn't actually steal the millions of dollars. You just looked at the bank and said, wow, it has a lot of money there. That's not a crime. So when you look at rook takes f2, queen takes f2, you're not losing a rook for a pawn at all. You're simply analyzing moves that haven't even been played. You'd only lose a rook for a pawn if you actually played rook takes f2, queen takes f2, and then it didn't work. But there's a big difference between doing something and looking at doing something. One costs you, if you're actually doing it, it could cost you the rook for the pawn. And then you lose the game if you didn't have bishop c5. But if you're looking at rook takes f2, queen takes f2, and it doesn't work, it does cost you something. It costs you time on your clock. Is that time that's well spent? Absolutely. If rook takes f2 has any chance of working at all and maybe winning the game, then it's well worth spending that extra time saying, if rook takes f2, queen takes f2, then I can have a chance to play bishop c5. And good players all do that. They don't just say, oh, I can't play rook takes f2, it's guarded too many times. They say, oh, I have rook takes f2, bringing the queen online with his king. If I do that, is it worth looking at? Is there anything I might be able to do? Is there a possibility of playing moves like bishop c5? If there is, I'm going to investigate it further, and if there's not, then I guess I won't play rook takes f2. But they don't just stop and say, I can't play rook takes f2, it's guarded too many times. And I see this game after game after game, year after year after year, this same quiescence error problem. And it's worth noting. I mean, if you compare players, let's say rated 1300 with players rated 2100, players 1300 are always missing tactics like this because they're always superficially stopping and saying, I can't do that, I can't do that. And people at 2100 or 2000 are always saying, gee, if I do that, I wonder if I can make that work. I wonder if that works. And if it doesn't, they don't do it. And if it does, they do. But they don't miss it just because the first move looks like it's not safe. What's ironic is when you give people 15 or 16, rated 15 or 1600, these same kind of positions, and say to them, okay, it's a puzzle now. It's black to play and win. Then they find it all the time. What's the difference? Well, you're telling them that there's something there. So after rook takes f2, queen takes f2, they don't just stop and say, I lost a rook for a pawn. They say, well, I can't find anything winning here. Let's let's try rook takes f2 and see if there's something there. And then they go, oh, I can see it now. Yeah, bishop to c5. But you want to get them to the point where they can see those things in games and not just in a puzzle where somebody's holding up a big sign saying, gee, there's something here. Don't stop till you find it. Well, you want to not stop till you find it in positions where things might be there. Now, obviously, if you have moves that are completely crazy and you want to know if they work, you're not going to spend a lot of time. For instance, here, I would never even look or spend any time looking at the move queen to e3. All right, queen to e3. He can take it with the queen. He can take it with the pawn. He can take it with the rook. What's the point? Well, there is no point. There's nothing. I mean, if you take something, it might put it on the same line with the f-pawn and with the king, but you're giving up a whole queen to possibly win a pawn or something. It just doesn't make any sense. So you have to learn which moves are the ones like rook takes f2 that are worth investigating, and which moves like queen e3 are completely ridiculous and you shouldn't spend any time at all. And that's a skill. The skill is recognizing the seeds of tactical destruction. Like in this case, recognizing I've got a queen and a king on the same line with the diagonal. Maybe I can stick a bishop on there and win something. That's really worth looking at. And those kind of lines don't always work. A lot of times I look at these sacrifices and I say, oh, that sacrifice doesn't work. I won't play it. And it costs me a few seconds on the clock. But at least I won't miss things that actually happen in the game like this. So we can show you how the game continued here. Black played bishop c6 instead of rook f2. And now white could stop the combination by playing knight e4. Now usually you don't want to pin yourself, but here knight e4 stops black from playing rook f2 on the next move. Instead, white plays queen to g3, and now black again could have played rook takes f2 and had the same combination, but instead, let me move the board down here. You can see it being occluded for a second. Instead, of course, once black misses this once, he'll miss it again. He says, just give me the free pawn. Rook takes b2. And here, white should play something like knight to d1, trying to get the rook out of there, and also guarding the f2 square. White plays knight to a4. But now black can just trade off and massively attack the pawn. He plays bishop takes, bishop takes. And now when I was going over the game, what I immediately saw was, with bishop opposite colors, I can attack this pawn more times than white can easily guard it. I can play rook d8, rook d2, and then maybe bishop c5, and, black is not only up a pawn, but he's probably winning at least another pawn or two, and f2 is going to fall. So we gave this position to the computer, and the computer said, it's interesting because the Lichess computer did not mention anything on this move. Black made a move and it said black was still winning. But Stockfish 12 said black could play this really nice removal, the guard idea, rook to c3. That's a move I really wouldn't look for that much because I'm already killing him. So I really don't need to do any great sacrifices at this point. But rook c3 completely works. Obviously, queen takes c3, loses to queen f2 check, king g1, queen takes g2 checkmate. So he can't take the rook. But how can he guard this pawn to stop the mate? If he plays queen to f4 to guard f2, then black can continue to remove the guard with a move like bishop g5. And the white queen has nowhere to go to guard f2. He could guard g2. He could play queen to g4, but then after queen takes f2 check, king h1, black can play some more of these funsy moves like rook to c4. Same idea. Queen takes c4 allows mate in 1, but otherwise, if the queen goes back and guards the mate, black gets another piece for free. So, good stuff here. I didn't see rook to c3. I thought just rook c to d8 followed by d2 was winning easily, which of course it is. Just for the fun of it, how did the game finish? Black played the strange move queen to b4. White saved the bishop, bishop b3. Now black played rook c3, but of course the queen's not on f2 anymore. White plays rook e3. Here Stockfish thinks that black should play bishop to c5 again with some complications. It's interesting, Stockfish 11 gives rook takes e3 a double question mark, and Stockfish 12 says rook takes e3 is the best move. Stockfish 12 says rook takes e3 is -6. Stockfish 11 said rook takes e3 is -3.3. I think part of the problem is that Stockfish 11 is really running on a very light mode. You know, it's going over all these games for people real fast, and I doubt if they have them thinking overnight. It's probably just thinking for a couple seconds and because it's pretty good even at a couple seconds. But that's part of why there's a discrepancy between what Stockfish 11 is saying and what Stockfish 12 is saying. But anyway, Stockfish 11 gives double question mark to this move. Stockfish 12 says it's the best move. White takes back with the queen, which is clearly incorrect. Again, allowing this kind of skewer stuff. Black sees it, plays bishop c5. Resigns is good here. White plays queen to c1, hitting the rook. So here's a good question. When you have bishop takes pawn check versus rook takes f2, which threatens a discovered check, which one is better? Well, in any given position, it may be one or the other. I would say, having seen this kind of idea where you have the discovered check versus the check, I would say about 7 times out of 10, taking with the discovered check is better. And this one is no exception. The rook is attacked by the queen. The bishop is guarded by the black queen. So playing rook takes f2 is better than playing bishop takes. So black does play rook takes f2, threatening all kinds of discoveries. Of course, black's completely winning here. He's up 2 pawns. He's got the better position. King to h1. Black plays queen g4, threatening mate. Stockfish says that's the best one. I thought queen e4 was a little better, but Stockfish says, of course, this is better. And now poor white has no great ways to stop the mate. He plays queen to g1. Black discovers an attack on the queen and plays rook takes a2. Even though the rook is attacked twice, he can't take the rook because of bishop takes queen. And the queen can't go far away from g2 or its mate. So the queen goes to f1. And we get a little windmill result here. Rook to f2. Queen to g1. I think he played now rook to b2, hitting the bishop. Queen to f1, and black played rook takes b3. We don't need to look at the rest of the game. Very nice finish there by black, and he won the game. So let's go back to our position that we started with. So again here, you know, white is in trouble. He needs to save the knight. He's nothing much better than knight c3. Here, black can just play bishop c6. He could have played rook takes b2. He plays queen b6, and as we saw, that really doesn't work. The attack on f2 is kind of a phantom attack. After knight takes b5, the queen can't take on f2 anyway. White, unfortunately, did not play knight takes b5. He plays queen f3. And now we start to see the combination. I'm going to go sliding back so I can see it. Queen f3. So here, black has that move. Rook takes f2. He misses it. Bishop c6. White can stop everything now with knight e4. People hate to pin their own pieces, and I would understand that here. Queen g3, and again, rook takes f2. Queen takes f2. Bishop c5. It's winning material. Black just plays rook takes b2. Here, white should play knight d1, but white's pretty much losing after knight a4, forking the rook and the queen. Sometimes you like to get these bishop opposite colors, but mostly in the endgame. In the middle game, it's not nearly as much help. The general principle, if you've never heard it, is bishops opposite colors are extremely drawish in the endgame, But in the middle game, bishops opposite colors are kind of winish, meaning if the game is relatively even otherwise, having bishops opposite colors means it's a better chance that one side or the other might win the game in the middle game, because when you have bishops opposite colors, you can attack squares that the other side can't defend and vice versa, which makes it more of an attacking game for both sides because they can attack things that the opponent can't easily defend. So bishops opposite colors is very drawish in the endgame, but it's actually the opposite in the middle game. So that, if you've never heard that, that's something good to know. The more you pick up these little general principles, the better it is. Okay, so in this position, of course, black is completely winning here. And this is where Stockfish, well, it's white's turn. White played, bishop takes, black's turn. Black could play rook c3 here. And as I said, I suggested rook c8, rook d2, which I'm sure is winning as well. Good position. All right, hopefully you enjoyed today's video on, it's mostly on quiescence errors. You know, how do you think? How do you spot them? How do you avoid them? How do you get better at them? You know, getting better at quiescence errors is an important part of moving up from like a 12, 13, 14, 1500 rating into a 17, 18, 1900 rating. Quiescence errors are one of the big differences. The other big difference is just the ability to see, you know, even non-quiescent error tactics. Just safety issues. You know, safety issues make the biggest difference. When people are rated under 1900, safety issues make the biggest difference in the ratings. But quiescence errors is a thought process that involves safety issues. All right, for my YouTube channel, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. If you like the video, hit like, tell your friends about the video, you know, all that kind of fun stuff. I've now done videos on almost every basic idea that you could use to improve. So if you haven't seen the other 145 videos on my channel, I've covered pretty much all the basics. I'm going to continue to make some videos, but I think I've gotten a lot of the basic subjects covered pretty well. So if you have problems with various things in chess, trying to get better, trying how to learn principles or openings or certain types of endgames, you know, I've got a lot of the basic stuff here, evaluation criteria, analysis, types of thought processes that are good, thought process errors. It's all there. So check out the channel, see if you like it. All right, this is Dan Heisman. We'll see you next time. Bye.